I will start by sharing a little summary of our project as usual. My name is Amy Tobias. I'm the project manager for building bilingual programs in Montessori schools. And I wanted to share with you how the project came about. This grew out of struggles from our founding partners that kept hearing conversations about how to best make bilingual education work in Montessori schools. And here you can see a photo from the Lead Montessori Conference open space session in Prague back in 2019. And this is the origin of bilingual Montessori. After shared discussions, we applied for a 3-year grant to support our project with Erasmus, and we launched bilingual Montessori in February of 2022. And the way that we structured our project is to offer it through a whole school perspective approach, meeting the specific needs of 3 different groupings: the Montessori guides, language specialists, school leaders, and these 3 areas, keeping in mind, we've developed the grant outcomes. And our outcomes for this grant, we have 3 main outcomes: the design process field guide. And this is set up to share effective classroom and administrative practices from Montessori schools, to provide second language acquisition information for supporting the goal of bilingual education. The second outcome we have is we are designing a 3-level online training course, and it will be based on this field guide. And the field guide, by the way, will be an online guide that you can follow, and that's what we've been working on. The training course is to support in collaboration those wanting to build or improve bilingual Montessori schools. And the third outcome is just to develop this community for all of us, to engage, to practice, to support each other through different activities such as these community conversations, social media groups, and the website bilingualmontessori.com. If you haven't met the team already, all of us, this is a picture of us here, and you can learn more about each one of us on our website. Also, each one of you are part of our journey, our group, our project, so please keep in touch with us via our website and on social media. Let us know your needs and your ideas and your feedback of the project, because you are also contributing in what makes it important so that we can all collaborate together. And we love to hear from you. I'm going to pass the word to Lucy Wellstead, who will talk to you about the update of the project and what we've been doing lately.
A few weeks ago, the bilingual Montessori team were all in Paris for our 4th transnational project meeting. We really did a lot of good work there and moved forward, and now we have huge to-do lists. During that meeting, which lasted 4 or 5 days, we actually decided that we wanted to create a focus group, an in-person focus group, and we wanted to run it like a session that would be similar to the sessions we're designing for our online course. We wanted to get the feedback from some of our target groups, so in this case, language specialists and teachers, as to whether our designing was going in the right direction and would serve its intended purpose. We decided on a topic, and we chose one that tends to be a recurring difficulty that comes up from teachers and school administrators and language specialists from all around the world. And it was how to talk to parents or how to answer difficult questions from parents about second language development. So often educational practitioners might feel a bit uncertain about how to answer these questions, and we want to see if we could possibly guide the educators in the right direction to finding some way of preparing to answer those questions. What we really wanted to do, the main objective of the session, was to empower the participants to feel equipped with the confidence and to have a solid plan. So in the session, first of all, we shared our own stories and brainstormed all the questions and doubts we tend to hear from families. Then we practiced classifying those questions, just basically to identify what areas we feel confident answering questions and which areas we feel less confident answering questions. So, for example, do we feel more confident about answering questions about a child's individual second language development and less confident about answering a question about the school's language policy and procedures? It's a little bit like that to identify which areas. Then we all work together collectively to share our knowledge and experience within the group, and we identified the support that we needed and the actions that we were going to take. So all the participants left with an action plan and hopefully a little more confidence, and they gave some good feedback. They were wonderful participants, so I'm sure if any of them are here or will watch the recording, I imagine they will. We're very grateful again for your time. It's really invaluable to our project to get this kind of feedback to guide our work. It was a great group because we had representatives from really experienced language specialists to newly qualified guides from different levels, really experienced guides. So it was really useful for us to hear from all those different types of people. Their feedback was really useful. And in fact, we spent the following morning, the Bilingual Montessori team spent the following morning analysing the session and their feedback so that we could focus the designing of the online course in the best way. So it's just right for the professionals that are going to seek to have that support. I think as a team, some of the main things we took away from the session was really the importance of tailoring the course to the wide variable of experience and responsibility and needs of all the professionals that work in bilingual elementary schools. That's really what we took away. So because we really want to design a course that's really useful for everyone that participates in it. We had some really nice feedback from the participants, and I've got a few quotes here. So one of our participants said, it was interesting. It allowed me to be more proactive, to try to find solutions and to listen to others' perspectives, opinions and challenges. Another said, the session helped me to shift my point of view regarding certain questions. Another, it inspired me how to develop a strategy and move forward behind an organized and specific plan. It's great. And another said the workshop helped me realize where I'm at ease and where I should focus on when dealing with parents and second language issues. So that's our update for today. And once again, thank you very much to those participants. I'll hand you over to Marie-Kay.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks for that update. And like Lucy said, thanks to all of you who might have participated. For today's episode, it almost feels like that. Today's talk is, we're welcoming back someone Laura Cassidy, who gave a talk in March. Laura is an upper elementary guide at Córdoba International Montessori School. she's originally from Scotland, and when she was still living in Scotland, she was working in the public school system, but in a multilingual context where they had students with diverse languages, and they also had an initiative to offer more than one language in the schools. And after she left the classroom, then she was working for a couple of years, actually training other teachers to work in that local program. Then she fortunately came to Spain and shifted to become a Montessori guide. She says because she really saw the potential of autonomous learning. And now she is the upper elementary guide at Cordova. In the last talk, she focused on reading and literacy and how she promotes that with her students. And this time she's going to focus on how she supports writing. And I think it's interesting to note the demographic of that school. Cordova is a small Spanish city. It's not a particularly international city, so the majority of her students only are exposed to English in school. I mean, there's a few exceptions that have an English-speaking parent, but the majority, it's their main exposure. And also, given the circumstances of the school, many of her students came into the elementary program from Spanish schools without any English. So she's really supported students at all different levels. We're going to do today's talk like we've done before, that you can put questions into the chat. And at the end of when Laura's finished, then I'll read out some of the questions for her to answer. I think we'll just go straight into the talk. Laura, are you ready to go? Great. So anyway, we're very excited to have Laura here again because her first talk got a really, there was a lot of interest and people asked for her to come back. So we're glad that she's accommodated us. She's a very busy woman. And so Laura, thank you for coming again. And please, if you want to start sharing your screen or however you want to get started.
Yeah, I'll start sharing the screen. Thanks, Maggie. Can you see it okay?
Yep.
Thanks, Marie-Kay. So today, like you said, last time I talked about reading, and but literacy is such a vast area that writing kind of deserves a talk on its own as well. You know, a lot of the ideas that I'm going to talk about today are things that I learned in my role as a TEFL teacher or in my role in Scotland. And then when I came to Montessori, I saw that there was space for these ideas to be really supportive, especially to second language learners. You know, the first thing that I wanted to mention was to think about how to approach the planning and teaching of writing. More than anything, I think that the disposition of the guide is what's really important here. And this applies to writing, but also to other language areas, that you need to be thinking, okay, what do I need to do as the guide to prepare each child that I work with in writing today to be successful? So that's not going to look the same for every child. But really what we're doing is like an extension of the prepared environment, where we want to make sure that when these children, especially second language learners, come and start writing, that they feel they have everything they need to be successful. And to do that, there are different strategies to scaffold learning. and I'm going to talk about those strategies in more detail in a minute. But and the word scaffold as well, it's important to think that we scaffold learning, and that support might be more in the beginning, and gradually we're taking it away as the child advances. But what we want to make sure is that each child thinks, yeah, I can do this, because the process of writing is such a personal thing anyway. And for adults as well, it's easy to feel blocked or demotivated when you're writing. You know, there's nothing more intimidating than a blank page.
Right.
So it's making sure that everybody has the tools they need to feel successful. Generally, when I teach writing, I think about it in terms of the different genres to cover. And I've shared a materials list that from Twinkle. Twinkle has a really good comprehensive list of genres. Also in Transparent Classroom, we have that too. But thinking about different things like report writing, biography, story writing, letter writing. So working through those genres and giving children exposure to them, but obviously the experience of a 12-year-old who's got a native English level will be very different from the experience of a 7 or 8-year-old who have a lower level of English. It's important as well to find those contexts where you can, you know, so if the children are not happy about something that's a school rule, why do we have to wear uniform, for example? Well, that's a great opportunity to say, well, let's write a letter to the head teacher about that. I mean, Lucy's here, she's received many of those letters about various topics. So we are following the child, but also conscious of covering lots of different types of writing and having repeated experience.
And Laura, I'll stop you for a second, because I'm just remembering when we spoke about this talk a couple of weeks ago, and you were really emphasizing, you know, like you said, the disposition of the adult themselves and then towards the students, and that the adult really has to believe that each child has the capacity, that you can help each child find the capacity to be successful with whatever the assignment is going to be or whatever the project is going to be. And that you use scaffolding, which is a term that sometimes Montessorians stay away from. So I also just want to point out that the way you can understand that in Montessori terms is the isolation of error. I mean, it's nothing more complicated than that. So I just wanted to give a little bit more context about where you're coming from, and especially about that term scaffolding, which I know sometimes makes people nervous.
Yeah,
I don't know why, but I know it does.
I mean, I'm going to go on as well to talk a little bit about the role of assessment, but really the role of the guide here is not to teach the writing, but to help create a room full of writers, to have children who feel like they want to write and that they can. And that for some children might just be one sentence, or it might be a child that writes lots, but you know, for the adult, they find it difficult to read. We're trying to capture in them that excitement for writing, and that empowerment stays with them then as they go through the elementary experience. I put this on my next slide because I really liked it, that from Ros Wilson, that if a child can't say it, they can't write it. Ros Wilson has a really great writing program called Big Writing. And lots of what I talk about today is based on that, but adapted for Montessori, because she often talks in a whole class context, and that's not how I do my writing sessions. But she's completely right that children really need lots of experience talking about what they're going to write. And so, and in this photo here, I think that we're all talking about something. The idea that you know, we're going to share experiences, or thinking about a scary story. Well, where's your story going to take place? Well, I'm going to start, mine's going to be in a haunted house. And thinking, you know, almost to the point where the children have the first sentence already in their head. Sometimes I say, before you start, what's the opening sentence going to be? Wow. So we're talking all together about what we expect from the writing, and also engaging them in their own experiences and excitement. Typically my writing sessions I do once a week, and they're based roughly on ability. Not always, it depends on the task, and in small groups. And sometimes that session really is just talking. It's talking about the topic and how we're going to get excited about it. And it can also be thinking about what we need to do to be successful in the task. I'm going to talk about that later on. The writing session can be a follow-up reflection. So we've done a big talk about writing. They've had a week or so to write themselves. And then the next week we're coming back and sharing what we've written so far. Ros Wilson talks a lot as well about the importance of the kind of the ambience when you're writing. So we reflect on, you know, where is a good place to do writing? Maybe it's not when I'm sitting next to my best friend, but in a quiet space. Is it better to capture these ideas when you have them in the moment, or other children need time to process? The role of the guide, in my experience, is that it's only with perhaps your youngest writers who are at the very beginning level of writing that the adult is needed to stay there with the child to do the writing. Usually the writing session is either discussing what we're going to write or reflecting on what we have written. Although it's true that my assistant does often support writing as part of the work that he does in the classroom. So I just wanted to go through some of the different strategies that I use to support L2 learners with their writing, the things that they need to be successful, to have that mindset that they can do it. One of the strategies is writing frames. Now, these are just some different examples from Twinkle. And I also want to kind of say at the same time that I would never just give all of these to everybody, that they're very much based on the different children and their needs. Twinkle, I've put it in the materials list that we'll share. You can see that they're at different levels. So like some children may need to also draw to be able to be inspired. The story mapping boxes, well, that's really just a way of planning. That's for more advanced learners. And the book review you can have at different levels. Quite often as well, we might have the first version using a writing frame, and if it's a more able child, they'll do their own version where they're no longer using the writing frame to present it. Word banks are another really useful tool. They support with vocabulary, so especially for second language learners, having like this winter one here, I remember using it to do winter poems. These are the kinds of words that the children can have the word bank on the desk, and it helps to give inspiration as well. And it also supports them with the spelling of words. I'm going to talk a bit more about the role of spelling when we're doing writing, but it helps children to feel confident to have these words in front of them. The same with the high frequency words. If you've been working on them in class, it's useful for the children to have a visual, and it supports them in having that feeling that they can achieve what they're doing. Personal dictionaries are also a really great thing in the classroom. The way that the personal dictionaries work in my class is that the children have a notebook with you can see it there in the photo, with every letter of the alphabet on each page. And they bring the personal dictionary, well, I was going to say everywhere, but at least to every presentation. So it's not just for writing. Whenever we do a presentation anywhere in the curriculum, and the kids who really like it will say, oh, I didn't know that word, I'm going to write it down. So the way that it works is they can write the word, the pages are folded in half. If they know the meaning of the word anyway, they just write it in English, or some children like to have the Spanish translation so they know. And then when they come to do their writing, they have their personal dictionary for reference. So they can use it in that moment to reflect on words they already know, but also if they're not sure of a word, my assistant or I, we will write the word on a whiteboard and they will get it into their personal dictionary for future use. Whenever anybody asks me to spell anything, I always say, have you checked if you have that word in your personal dictionary? And it's a really useful way that they feel empowered, and also as it fills up, they just realize that they know a lot of words, which is also useful. The inspiration and context is also really, really important. I talked about that a bit already, but just, tapping into what they like, what they're interested in. Scary stories are always popular with I have an upper elementary, doing things in context. Like another way that we write letters is we've just started to have pen pals in Austria. So we just all wrote out letters introducing ourselves and we're waiting for the reply. And then Peace Day is another one. I think in the photo here, it was a poem for Peace Day. And here as well, in the other photo, the comic, in the class I have, especially, they're really interested in comics. So, we adapted that as well to have, so it meets their language needs in different way. You can see in the photo here, this child's writing quite a lot in the comic. For other children, it might be, their criteria might be to have just more illustration and less words. So I wanted to speak a bit about the role of self and peer assessment. In the materials, I've included an article by Dylan William called Inside the Black Box. But it's talking about the idea that really children need to know how they can be successful at something. That if you were at work and you did something for your head teacher, you wouldn't feel good if then when you showed it to your head teacher, they said, it's good, but you haven't done all these things, if you hadn't talked about them in the beginning. And so that's how children can feel with writing if you don't agree the criteria first. Or if you start to focus on spelling when that's not something you talked about in the beginning. That can really impact the motivation and confidence of young writers. So, when we focus on creative writing, spelling is not the top priority. That doesn't mean that as the guide, you don't notice the spelling mistakes. And I have my notepad, I write them down, and I think, well, next week we need a presentation on that. But in that moment with the child isn't the moment for doing that. So the way that we agree the criteria is that, for example, if we're writing a story, this is an example of a criteria we agreed here. We'll say, well, what are the things that we need to do so that this is a good story? And for some children, that might be that it has an introduction, a problem, and a conclusion, and that's it. For some children, that's enough. But what I try to do always is to elicit that criteria from them and include it. Then for other children, you might have more advanced criteria. So you say, well, we talk about also the characters and the setting. And then, you know, other children who maybe have been working on a metaphors and similes, well, we might also put that in as criteria. But it's really important that the children know exactly what the criteria is before they start the writing process. So in a writing session, when we do writing, we'll get inspiration and then we'll work together to agree the criteria. And usually I give a deadline. So I'll say, okay, we're going to meet again at the same time next week, usually. But the deadline isn't to say that story has to be finished, because some children will want to write for a longer, or they'll get involved in the story. So it really cuts short the creativity if they have to have the ending finished. But I say, you know, I would like to see that everybody's been working on it. And then in the session, when they come back the following week, we share. I don't obligate children to share their work. Some children don't like to, but most do. And then we talk together about the criteria, or they do it individually. So we say, which things that we talked about did you manage to do? And usually they have the criteria in their notebook with the writing, and I use two colors, which is pink and green. Green for growth is how I remember it. So the children themselves read the writing and think, okay, well, I did describe the characters, so I'm gonna color that one in pink. Describing the setting, well, actually, I don't think I really did that, so that one will be green, and then they'll consider it for the next time they do a piece of writing. Or lots of children like to edit the story or add to it, so they can then go back and be like, now I have met all the criteria that we talked about at the start. So that's more or less how we do each writing session. You know, and the role of the guide there again is in supporting the child to feel successful, and it's allowing the child, it's giving them the tools they need to correct their own work, to have the control of error. You know, it's not my job to correct that writing, because they're able to do that themselves. You know, and so just to go back to the point about spelling, like, because spelling, I think instinctively as a teacher, it's the most visible thing that you see. So it's almost an instinct to want to correct it. But it's really important that unless it's in the criteria, and which it may be sometimes, it's not the moment to correct it.
So Laura, I think it will be helpful if you just kind of say a bit more, I mean, about how you support the children in doing their own self-correction. Because I think, you know, as adults, we tend to want to do that for them. And so having a few more ideas about how to step back, but still supporting them in the process, I think that would be great. Yeah,
I mean, the criteria is one of the main ways that I do that, eliciting it and then them reflecting on it themselves. Also, with more advanced writers, we will do a drafting process. And we talk a bit more about how adults as well, we go through our writing and we look at all the things. And in that process, sometimes the children will choose to correct the spelling or correct each other's work. So sometimes it does kind of just naturally happen.
Mm-hmm.
The other way that I do it is with, this is also by Ros Wilson. It's called the pupil-friendly criterion scale.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that this works is that the children assess their writing. It's got different levels. And you can see I've used the colors there with I think maybe she's done it the other way now, I see it, with the green and pink. But they read the writing themselves and they go through this criteria, not every week. This is a kind of ongoing process. So like the first one says there, I can use interesting words. I must have at least 2 examples. So we went through this together. She showed me her 2 words that she thought were interesting. And so she said, yeah, I got that. So we go through all that criteria together. And this we did individually. And then, so she has like 3 different things there that she's reflected that she hasn't yet got in her writing. So she's picked one of those 3 that she didn't use, and she's made that her writing target. So you can see at the top, she's written, I can use words about feelings. So that is an additional individualized criteria that the children have when they do writing. So as well as the criteria of the task, there's that one other thing that is their writing target. So for this child, when she's writing her scary story or whatever she's doing, she'll also try and put some words in about feelings. And then when we look at it, I'll say, what about your writing target? And she'll say, yeah, I did that this time, actually. So then it's time to start. And when we start noticing it coming up, we say, well, this one now is finished. Let's move on to the next thing that you can work on. And those levels are, they're differentiated. And what's good is that, like, the level of writing in my class is really varied, but the criterion skills go from, almost emergent writers very, very early. So there's always a criterion scale where a child can go through it, even just with the adult, and feel, well, actually, there's a lot of things that I'm doing here, that I have got a full stop, or I did use a capital letter, even if that is just one sentence. And those experiences are really empowering for the learners, because they start to think, wow, look at all these things that I can do. And then also they see as well, it asks them to talk about, it asks them to put a certain number of words. The children also really like meeting that criteria, counting the words, thinking about how many more they can add.
Yeah.
And I found that before I used this, and I just used, in the beginning, I used just the criteria I was talking about. But the difference with this, I feel, is that I can really meet the needs of everybody at their level, and my more advanced writers too. I have a few native speakers and a few are not, but are very, very keen writers, that they can be thinking about, paragraphs, and thinking about different types of punctuation, and, there's no limit to it. And I'm ensuring that those children are also getting their needs met and feeling like they're advancing, rather than just it being easy for them.
Right. I was going to ask you about putting the number of words and how they respond to that. Like, obviously they love a challenge in general, but I'm just imagining, maybe I would be the one who would just need to finish and fill up half the page with nonsense to have 100 words. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that could happen. It hasn't happened yet, but I guess
okay.
Yeah, I guess you have to be careful of that. Yeah, but usually I just find they're pleased to, and usually with these criteria scales as well, they're already doing the number of words more or less, like without it being too much of a conscious decision.
Well, what I hear you saying is that because there's so many different scales, that you can really help them find the one that they see themselves in. And so it is really helping them have realistic goals that are achievable.
Yeah. And also experiencing that process of, like, this is what I want to work on, and I'm going to achieve it, So it's very easy to achieve and to see your own progress, because that's when they start to feel really good, when they can see that they're advancing. And I think without those experiences, especially maybe in a more traditional system where I'm thinking about when I was at school and you get a page back with all the corrections on it, like it just can be demotivating in the process of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you wanted me to say about that, Mary Kay, that I've missed? Or
No, I just think that it's a super interesting tool that maybe, people aren't aware of. And so that's why I just thought it was worth pausing on and kind of, understanding, because also it's kind of on the slide, I'm sure everyone else has this, it's hard to read the words on, on that page. So that's why I'm glad that you read one out as an example, just to give a real sense of what the criteria are.
sure, I'll share them as well in the list.
Great.
So then to move on a little bit, because I'm really talking about so far about explicitly teaching writing each week as part of my language sessions. But as I'm sure you all know, in Montessori, literacy is across the whole curriculum, and especially in elementary, we need literacy skills to really access the whole curriculum. But there are lots of opportunities within that too for meeting objectives in literacy. So one way of doing that is with the vocabulary development is really, it's great during the cultural curriculum, using things like nomenclatures and the charts and the personal dictionary. All those moments and those presentations provide a chance to enhance vocabulary and also for the children to write those words down and advance. And you can see in the photos there's one photo doing the guinea pig anatomy. We had guinea pigs as a class pet, so there was a thing for guinea pigs for a long time. And also in this one here with the atom, it's lots of experience of writing and using visuals rather than translation. Also, another thing that can be really useful is taking experiences of things like science experiments, that's what you're seeing here, as an opportunity to also advance a writing skill. Because we know that reading and writing needs extra input, but also we're busy and we have responsibility for everything, or at least some of us do. So, doing a science experiment is also a great chance to work on sentence structure, especially with children early in their elementary experience. So, thinking as the guide, again, going back to that idea of disposition of the guide, how can this child be successful? And how can I also advance their writing while they're doing other stuff? So, thinking about the hypothesis and making sure, giving that as an opportunity to write a really good sentence with a capital letter and a full stop. It was one of my colleagues in elementary one that told me she was doing that a lot, where she was thinking, how can I sneak in a literacy objective at the same time as these moments? And I think it is that thing of just being aware of it and making the most of those opportunities. And the other way that, writing skills are really needed for big works, it's the same thing about thinking about how the learners can be successful. And when Maria Montessori was talking about big works and meeting the needs of second plane learners, she wasn't talking about second language learners, but it really does meet their needs, the extra needs of language learners in a lot of ways. That's exciting, it's in context, it takes up a lot of space, all those things they love. But it's also really important when doing these big works that it's adapted by the guide so the children can be successful. So again, thinking, well, instead of in maybe a typical Montessori classroom, you're able to say, okay, go and explore, see what you can find. Before that, there's a step before that with second language learners where the guide needs to think, okay, they're going to explore, but how can I make sure they understand what they go looking for?
Right.
So there's a few ways to do that. You know, one of them is the books and materials that you have on your shelves and in your class. So for example, in my reference books in my class, I have several books about the same topic, but they're at different levels. So that means that children can all access and be successful in their exploration. The same with websites. We have, because apart from not only for levels, but also for quality, you know, the information on websites that they use for investigation are bookmarked websites, and they're at a variety of levels. Sometimes the role of the adult in that situation is to say, hey, let me show you this web page, or hey, I have a really good book about that. So you're assisting a little bit to help them feel successful.
I think you could say a little bit more about that. I remember when we spoke about the different levels, and you were telling me your system of how you help direct the children to resources that are at their level.
Yeah, well, the way that so when the children in my class do an investigation, they fill in a form, for want of a better word, where they reflect as a group, like they put their name, the title, they think about what they want to learn, and there they note down as well the sources they're going to use. So that's a moment where they might then that's when they're exploring the books in the class. And that might be the moment where I or my assistants say, well, this book would be really good for that, or this website would really help you. So and when they do that, and they also write on there what they think their final project will look like, you know, the form of it, they show it we all agree on it together, and we look at it. And in that moment, it gives us a little bit of it's kind of a step that allows the adult to see what's happening and assist with that process. And the way that they investigate is that everybody does this, where they have little note cards. And on the little note cards, they can write down information from the sources. And I really try to emphasize that it's quality over quantity, that I would prefer a few note cards with one sentence on each note card, and you understand the sentence, then, you know, lots of information copied out, but they don't know what it means.
Right.
And on the note card as well, they record the source of the information, so the title of the book or the website. So they're getting used to that process as well of referencing. And then with children, especially with children with a lower level of English, the group will all go off, do their investigations, and we bring the note cards all together, and then we read them as a group. And then that's the moment to start on the final product. So that's when you're getting into making the poster or the PowerPoint, or I don't know, however it's going to be. So that kind of creates a process for them, again, where they feel successful. And it means that then the last step when we do big works in this class is that they often choose to present it to each other. And in that moment, I'll often say, tell me 2 really interesting things you learned, you know, rather than reading it, but, you know, everybody's not fully understanding. And then they can give 2 really interesting facts about the thing that they've been learning about. You know, and they're also having experience in that moment of paraphrasing the information that's written. That's can be quite a challenging skill.
Definitely.
And also taking questions. So anything they've said is accountable. You know, the others for sure are going to want to know more or ask why or how. So, you know, that process really came from my experience, where I was finding when the children got to the oral presentation stage, they just wanted to read off a big thing that they'd written, but then they didn't properly understand what they were reading. So then I felt like, gosh, I'm putting these kids in a situation where they have to answer questions, but they don't really fully understand it. And so those adaptations really supported the learners to feel empowered and to be working exactly in the level that they need to work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the older children or the more able children eventually don't need that process entirely. They don't need to sit and read every note card together, but they do need to write them down and get the sources. And, you know, it also keeps in check. Some of them have learned copy paste, and that kind of helps to also make sure that that doesn't happen too often too. And then in the adaptations of the big works, sometimes as well, we will support that with writing frames, like I showed in the other slide. So especially things like an animal report, because the one that they have on Twinkle, for example, has like different headings like diet, habitat. And maybe for some children, they're only going to write a couple of words in each of those headings, but they have to be able to read the information and take it out of what's there. And that's a more valuable process than copying it down without a proper understanding of it. The good thing about having those adaptations as well, especially with books and materials, is that you can still have mixed ability groups doing these types of works. And you can recommend one book for one child and one for another. And it's okay if they overlap a bit because they can support each other. But you can make sure that you're getting that rich experience of them helping each other, working together. And the more able learners or English speakers supporting those who need a bit more help. You know, they also love that role of helping to understand a word or giving a translation.
Yeah. No, this is all really wonderful, Laura. Thank you. And I'm just thinking that since I think we have at least a few other colleagues who are in the classroom with children, that they may have questions for you, more specific questions about the materials or how you organize certain activities. So please, for those of you who are listening, please put your questions in the chat, and then we can hopefully have a useful few more minutes with Laura, kind of clarifying things that you'd like more information on. Laura, did you have any concluding comments?
Not really. I mean, I think the thread running through all of it, or what I've tried to get across, is that for writing to be successful like this with second language learners, it's all really about the guide reflecting before each activity on what needs to be done for the child to feel empowered and successful. So that really means that every time they do writing, whether it's a specific writing task or it's through the cultural curriculum, the guide needs to have had a bit of a process of thinking before that about what needs to be done so each child at their level can be successful. And when that happens, that's, you know, when the magic happens, when they start to really engage with it.
Right. Well, thank you. And now we will encourage people to put their questions in the chat, and we'll start looking at them.
I'll stop sharing my screen.
There's one question from Aoife who says, do you use many different criteria lists or focus on certain of the criteria in a single list, depending on the child's needs?
Can you say that again, Mary Kay?
Sure. Do you use many different criteria lists or focus on certain of the criteria in a single list, depending on the child's needs?
Okay. So typically the criteria we create is based on the task. So the criteria we agree together and they're usually in ability groups, so the criteria is more or less the same. So like, for example, the one with the story having a beginning, a middle, and an end. So we'd have one criteria list for that genre of writing, I guess you would say, for that group. And then in addition to that, the child can also incorporate their writing target from the individual criteria, if it's applicable. So in the end, yeah, the criteria is different, usually for each group based on ability. But in each task, I'd say there's one criteria list for the genre plus the objective of that child.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, to me it does. We'll see if other people want more clarification. Someone else asked if you teach L2 to this level. I'm not quite clear what that means exactly, that question. So if the person who asked it wants to elaborate a little bit more. So we're not getting a lot of questions. Surprisingly enough, I thought people, here, the person who asked that question is clarifying. To add to my question, I find it hard to run this task, L2 language.
Yeah, hang on.
Okay, you're going to clarify for us. Thank you.
Elizabeth, go ahead and ask the question.
Okay. Thank
Yes,
you.
please.
Can you hear me? Okay, so I really loved what you had to say, and I really walk away with many ideas. But I'm a native speaker in a Montessori school, and I'm not necessarily Montessori trained, but I've been in the school for a long time. A lot of the points that you made, I don't know if my students could really keep up I get them for maybe 1 hour or 2 hours at a time. I'm not sure. I'm not good at doing little blocks and building the writing. And so the way that you're talking, and then I looked at your pictures with the 3 pyramids and building your story is I'm in P2, by the way. So do you find it easy to get to this level in P2?
P2, I'm not sure exactly what P2 is.
Oh, okay, sorry. The second grade of Montessori, the 9 to 11-year-olds.
Oh, okay. I mean, it really depends on the children. Like so some of the children, yeah, but because everybody's working with their own criteria, everyone can be successful at that level. But so this class that I have as well, like their English level now has advanced a lot, but in the first years that I had this class, there was lots of more Spanish than anything else, and they had quite a low level. So the criteria then is different. It's lots of word banks and the writing frames, extra vocabulary. And maybe your objective is that they're writing 1 or 2 sentences. It's not going to be that they're writing 250 words.
Clearly.
Also, that, I'm the guide in the class full time.
Right. That's what I was going to say. It's an immersion situation.
Yeah, and that's what I picked up in this moment too, is that, but because we're brought in and we also get the children for the 3 years, but what I'm feeling for the moment is writing now because of multimedia and the way the world is developing. Children are becoming very fluent in language with speaking, but they're learning a very strong vernacular wherever they are. And I now actually feel that writing is becoming much more important because I think it brings a formality, it brings a politeness. So just watching what you're able to do in the classroom, I was just wondering, but yeah, it was. I was curious, and I also feel that the interface of English in the classroom as a second language is very much changing. It's changing very much, I should say. And writing will be the way to move English in a more positive, polite way in the classroom, at least from in my experience in my school.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, it really depends on how long, like I said, how long you have them for. If you only have them
Yes,
a few hours a week, then I guess, and it depends on their level, that maybe it's more communication based, writing
yes,
plays a role in that, but it might not be the main focus.
yes. Okay,
But
perfect.
like I
Thank
said,
you.
it depends.
Oh, sorry. No, keep going. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that
Excuse
was
me. Yeah, yeah.
So
No, beautiful.
another question, Laura, and reading it makes me realize that maybe you weren't explicit enough in explaining the groups that you set up for the writing activities. Because someone asked, Monica Cosa is asking, how do you navigate the meetings time-wise? How much time do you give these meetings during the work cycle? And do you work with leveled writing groups like leveled reading groups?
Yeah, I mean, time's always the thing, right? There's not ever enough. But more or less, I dedicate a work cycle a week to writing, and the children are grouped roughly based on ability. I never thought of it like the leveled readers, but it's true that it kind of naturally is a bit like that they're grouped based on their ability and the materials that they need. And typically I'll spend 20 minutes or so, sometimes longer if the group need it. And like I said, it's mainly talking. It's not the part of the writing. The writing part is done separately. And sometimes it's done in that moment. But when they start writing, that's when I start moving. And quite often as well, I will say to my sister, like, I'm moving now, but can you stay and just carry on this, because they've got a lot of, enthusiasm.
Okay. Joanna Stewart is asking, do you find that your pink and green highlighters help them to be autonomous with their editing process?
Yeah, that it means that the role of the correction is done by them. And also some children, the highlighters, usually they just use them for the criteria, but some children like to go through the text as well with the highlighter. So if it's like, I don't know, to describe the character, they like to then find the part where they describe the character and highlight that part pink, to show that they have it.
Okay.
Not all children. Some children are, they have their work, it's precious and they don't want it highlighted, which is fine too.
Yeah, Joanna also added that she always felt that children needed a lot of my individual attention for doing their editing as they got closer to creating a final draft.
Yeah, I find that too. So sometimes, I don't remember if I said this, but sometimes the writing session that we have is also drafting. So, because like you say, Joanna, like there's just, fitting it in. So like maybe one week we're doing the input, the next week we're reflecting and assessing, and maybe the follow-up will be for them to go and edit, and then the next week we'll come back and look at how they're editing. so to kind of have a role in that process. So when I say I do writing every week, it's not necessarily that they are writing from the beginning.
Right. Right. So Brian Solly says we're using theater to support the creative writing and in Greek history curriculum. It's a great idea to diversify the curriculum so that more than one goal is met with the assignment.
Yeah, that sounds great. I haven't done that, but it sounds like a good idea.
And yeah, I think we have the same person, Brian Solly, also mentioned a book called Into the Woods by John York was a good resource in terms of providing discussion and background for the creative writing process. And I think that in your environment that you have deliberately selected a lot of different types of reading material that the children are using all the time, which obviously, as we know, is indirectly stimulating their own writing process, right?
Yeah.
So it looks like, yeah, it's also time to wrap up. Control of errors for the children to correct themselves when doing a writing exercise. I mean, I think it's so important to use these little tricks in helping children become more autonomous. Spelling is not the main priority in creative writing. Yes, good to be reminded of that. Having the discussion of topics as a group before writing and deciding on criteria. Yeah, that is very helpful. I think, like Laura said, citing Roz Wilson, if you can't say it, you can't write it. There, someone wrote that in too. Word banks, the personal dictionaries. I mean, I think one thing that we seem to talk a lot about when we're talking about children who are developing these skills in a second language, I mean, even in a first language, but especially in a second language, visual prompts are really essential to support them and inspire them too. So seeing the words in front of them, seeing words with the pictures, having the personal dictionary, and they can, draw a picture, define it however they want. I think that the visual is super, super important for the second language learners. Well, thank you, those of you who took a moment to write in. It's really helpful feedback for Laura and for us. And now we will let you know that the next and last, actually, community conversation for 2023 is going to be on November 22nd. And an Italian woman, Licia Arnaboldi, who was for many, many years the English language coordinator at a Montessori school in Como, Italy. And like many of you, her school had very limited or has very limited hours for English. It's not an immersion situation like Laura has, where she's with the children every day, all day. So the English teachers in her school only had maybe 5 or 7 hours per week to give English lessons. And so Licia and her colleagues were very resourceful in coming up with a cultural curriculum and a cultural activities to support the English language development of the children in the school. And so she is going to offer us the insights and kind of the lessons that she and her colleagues learned over the years for schools that operate in this kind of situation. So that should be really fun, and thinking about kind of the learning that can happen outside of the classroom as well, which can be useful for any of us. So that will be our next talk on November 22nd. And then after the holidays, we'll have Denise Fernandez, who will be talking about how she supports children's house age children, 3 to 6 year olds, in building vocabulary. And then Roberta Andena, who will speak about, again, from an Italian situation where they do Italian national tests, but her school has also developed a program of offering the Cambridge exams, and how they have figured out to do this and be respectful of the Montessori philosophy. So I think many of you will be interested in that as well. And otherwise, I will send out another newsletter pretty soon, so you can start signing up for the next talk. And also, so you can, you can access the recording of this talk and the last one from Ana Camila on our website, or by subscribing to our YouTube channel. And then you get informed immediately when there's a new recording available. So thank you, everyone who's been here today. Thank you, Laura, very much. Very generous in sharing all of your lessons learned and your resources. I think people are putting in the chat how much they appreciate your generosity. So on that note, and I'll just thank my colleagues, my bilingual Montessori colleagues, Lucy and Amy, who have taken care of the tech, behind the scenes tech part of this session. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks.